Hello, this is Ron Zook speaking on behalf of AWARE, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a group that began after the 9/11 attacks of a good many years ago. And we continue to apprise people of the continuing wars around the world and the incidents of racism within the USA, and try to make people aware of what's going on and what can be done about it. So tonight, Karen Aram was with us, and we're going to be touching on a number of topics. I'll begin with some facts and figures from a website called Win Without War, which is an anti-war organization, just as AWARE is. This says that 13 years ago today, the first American bombs fell on what would become the longest war in America's history. Today, while the headlines are focused on Iraq and Syria, it's all too easy to forget that the U.S. war in Afghanistan continues to drag on. As you read these words, 30,000 American men and women in uniform are still fighting and unfortunately being wounded and dying in Afghanistan. Last week, the U.S. signed the bilateral security agreement with Afghanistan, ensuring that, tragically, the U.S. war in Afghanistan will drag on for years to come. For far too long, this says, American men and women have bled and died in a fight that has no military solution. The fact that the future of Afghanistan requires an Afghan-led political solution means keeping U.S. troops in Afghanistan could be an obstacle to genuine progress. According to figures released by the Department of Defense, 2,335 American military personnel have died as a result of fighting in Afghanistan. That's about 180 per year, or one every other day for the past 13 years. It's costing us, that is the American taxpayer, $10.2 million per hour for the operations in Afghanistan. And yet there's been remarkably little protest against this failed and futile effort in Afghanistan. It cannot be decided militarily. More and more people, I think, are starting to accept that. And yes, that seems to be America's first impulse always when there's trouble anywhere, is to start bombing. Will there be military action, is the thing constantly asked by the American media. Another paragraph from this website says, the hard truth is that U.S. airstrikes will not solve the problems we face in Iraq and in Syria. Over the past 13 years, we have seen how the unintended consequences of military action can spiral out of control. U.S. bombs and the civilian deaths they cause often serve as recruitment tools for groups like ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. American-supplied weapons have already fallen into the hands of violent extremists and are being used against American allied groups. American military intervention often makes the hard diplomacy needed to solve the underlying political conflicts impossible. So it goes on and on. More speculation in the press about what Obama's attitude is and whether he sees any end to this. Peter Baker, September 13th, New York Times. The paths to war then and now haunt Obama. Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, the whole Middle East, are starting to look more and more like Obama's quagmire. Obama is quoted as saying, I was not here in the run-up to Iraq in 2003, he told a group of visitors who met with him in the White House before his televised speech to the nation. According to several people who were in the meeting, it would have been fascinating to see the momentum and how it builds, which seems to me a strange comment on what was happening. he was acutely aware, this group says, that the operation he was about to embark on would not solve the larger issues in that region by the time he left office. This will be a problem for the next president, Mr. Obama said ruefully, and probably the one after that. But he alternated between resolve, as he vowed to retaliate against President Bashar al-Assad if Syrian forces shot at American planes, and prickliness, as he mocked critics of his more reticent approach to the exercise of American power. So that, I guess, shows us how evil that President Assad is if his armed forces shoot back at the American planes who are attacking them. How much more evil can you get? Every bomb that falls on the Middle East seems to recruit more volunteers from various countries around the world to fight on the side of ISIS. There's been some recognition of this. In the Israeli publication Haaretz, which unfortunately has a relatively small readership apparently in Israel. Islamic State recruitment soaring in the wake of U.S. bombing. The Islamic State jihadist organization has recruited more than 6,000 new fighters since America began targeting the group with airstrikes last month, according to the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. At least 1,300 of the new recruits are said to be foreigners who have joined IS from the outside the swaths of Syria and Iraq that it controls. The United States has launched some 165 airstrikes on IS targets since early August, and this material is over 2 weeks old, maybe 3 weeks. Other strikes have been carried out by the UK and France, the latest a French attack on the logistics depot in Iraq on Friday. So the question has arisen, what can the USA do about the recruitment of these people motivated by the American strikes on the Middle East, particularly Iraq and Syria. Another note on attempts to recruit foreign fighters. Israel's spy agency launches online recruitment drive. From Newsmax on September 22nd, Israel's secretive overseas spy agency, Mossad, launched a new website Monday to recruit potential spooks, as well as an espionage thriller-type video, hoping to hook new talent. The site, mossad.gov.il, available in Hebrew, English, Russian, French, Arabic, and Persian, features inspirational quotations from Israeli leaders, past and present, and an unattributed, "This is my secret, always and forever," which links to the careers section. The introduction questionnaire asks candidates to pick their best qualities, such as sociability, charisma, analytical ability, and inquisitiveness, and inquiries about favorite hobbies and other indicators of personality. A statement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said that the aim of the new site was to make the organization more accessible to potential recruits who may not be exposed to the variety of positions available. Government officials also circulated a Hebrew language video featuring sunglasses wearing suited American men drinking coffee while snooping around unidentified modern office buildings, a woman breaking into a highly secured communications room, and plenty of satellite imagery. So
if someone goes on this website and applies, they can get a job in Israel?
Well, with Mossad anyway.
With Mossad, okay. But it may not be in Israel. Okay.
Yet. On what appeared to be the Mossad's official YouTube channel, active only since Sunday, user comments were disabled below the recruitment video. Yet it received some 2,600 views by early Monday evening. So the news from the Middle East is not very encouraging, I must say. Karen, comments?
Well, not really. there is nothing really encouraging out there these days. I noticed that the corporate-owned media is focused very heavily on one American teenager who was stopped from getting on the plane in Chicago to go and fight for ISIS, and that seemed to be the biggest news specialty out there on the corporate-owned media.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what the American people get.
Yeah. Tonight at the Art Theater, after, well, you'll be seeing this after it's shown. Before this show at 7:30, there would be a movie at the Art Theater downtown Champaign about the American media and its performance during the past few years, with a number of distinguished commentators and analysts. And it may appear again and again, so look for it. It's called Liberty, the Shadow, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
And it could be very interesting indeed. But again, you'll be seeing this after it's been shown, at least for the first time. The Swedish government has announced, the newly elected Prime Minister of Sweden has announced that it will be recognizing the state of Palestine. This has got them denounced by the Israelis, Mr. Netanyahu, in particular, who has created something of a flap this week by telling President Obama that his opinions and actions with respect to the state of Israel are un-American, and they're not in accord with American ideals, I guess is the way he put it. And this is creating something of a pushback, although it's very difficult to get anything said or done or publicized that might appear to be anti-Israel, and then of course will be promptly denounced as anti-Semitic. Coalition bidding for a ban on federal funding for anti-Israel activity on campus. 10 organizations, most of them Jewish, are cooperating on an effort to prevent federal funding for anti-American and anti-Israel activity on college campuses. The coalition wants Congress to reform the Higher Education Act, which includes the allocation of federal funds to 129 international studies and foreign language centers in universities nationwide. Congress is reconsidering the Act's reauthorization. The organizations which are involved in education, the Jewish community, and civil rights are working to ensure that there is an oversight of universities, federal oversight, what gets said and done there. The goal is to require recipients of federal funding to implement grievance procedures, and for the Department of Education to include a complaint resolution process. Rabbi Meyer May, executive director of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, called on Congress to press the Department of Education to demand that those who receive HEA funding, quote, guarantee that the funds will not be used to stifle the free speech of Israel advocates or to foment anti-Semitism on the campus. So we're going to be watched.
What about free speech for non-Israeli, pro-Israeli? I mean, what?
Yeah, good question.
Gee, I guess then it doesn't count.
Yeah, well,
no, they just want.
We're seeing some of the complications and implications of that
Yes.
locally recently.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, a bit of good news, finally. Headline: Obama inches U.S. closer to accepting landmine ban. The U.S. apparently is approaching approval of the International Landmine Ban Treaty. USA is one of the few nations not to approve it because we insist on maintaining landmines in Korea on the Korean Peninsula and the no man's land between North and South Korea. In his Tuesday address to the Clinton Global Initiative in New York City, President Barack Obama announced that the United States will not use anti-personnel landmines anywhere outside the unique circumstances of the Korean Peninsula, echoing his administration's policy announcement that they will be abandoned otherwise throughout the world. And they will be destroyed. The American stockpile of them will be destroyed, except for those, that is, this says, apart from those needed to defend South Korea. The announcement brought the U.S. closer to fully embracing the Mine Ban Treaty, which was successfully negotiated 17 years ago this month in Oslo, Norway, and signed by 122 nations 3 months later in Ottawa, Ontario. The treaty prohibits the use, production, trade, and stockpiling of landmines and obligates mine-contaminated countries to clear affected areas. All states that are party to the treaty must also contribute to clearance and to victim assistance. Despite calling for the eventual elimination of anti-personnel landmines back in 1994, the United States did not sign the 1997 treaty because of the supposed importance of safeguarding South Korea's northern border. Since then, the U.S. has remained the biggest contributor to landmine clearance and victim assistance around the world, donating more than $2.3 billion for efforts in 90 countries, even as 3 successive presidential administrations, those of Clinton, Bush, and Obama, have grappled with the contradiction of its financial commitment to help clear landmines and its refusal to join the treaty. With this latest announcement, the U.S. has taken yet another step toward closing that gap. So there's a tiny bit of progress to be reported there. Okay, Karen.
Well, on the landmine issue, all I can say is, well, finally.
Yeah.
But at least I know that we have been contributing financially at one point to rid the world of landmines, but at last we're finally getting there. I do think it's very positive that the Swedish government, the new prime minister, or that's not, is that his title?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That he is taking the a progressive approach to recognition of Palestine sovereignty or a state. So that's definitely a positive and a first step. Let's hope more follow through. So yeah, that's good news. Any more I don't have any more comments on any of the bad news that most of the time.
As our Asian expert here, let's move to...
okay, I'll talk about Hong Kong. Yeah. I mean, Hong Kong has dominated the news the past couple of weeks, and on the corporate-owned media, much of it has been very negative towards China, of course, in that, all these protesters protesting. They want democracy. They want the law changed, and it's that evil empire of China. Now, I don't like always sitting here and defending China, but the reality is that although the issue of the elections did spark, it actually did spark it, the protest, nonetheless, and this was the statement that came out from the government, from the Beijing government, that they would only have like 2 or 3 candidates would be vetted by the pro-Beijing nomination committee, would be allowed to stand. And that's the real issue, is that the candidates are vetted by Beijing. And so legally, people are saying, well, that's not really democratic. And I pointed out a few weeks back that how does that differ from what we have here in the U.S., where we have the Democrat Party and we have the Republican Party, and we've got all these lobbyists out there promoting and vetting candidates. Try to run as an independent, or try to run as an anti-government policies on either of the Democrat or the Republican ticket. You probably won't have a chance. We've actually seen that happen, whether it's on a local level or a federal level. I don't see any difference, quite frankly. Now, there is an American lawyer of Chinese descent who did give me some information regarding the legalities, and he pointed out that, the problem is that the UK and the China, they didn't want to be too specific when they drew up the laws. They said that the Hong Kong's former British lackeys in charge were legislators who didn't understand laws that well. They went along with it because they thought it worked relatively okay for the British in Hong Kong. But the British also didn't want to admit openly that they had a lot of problems in Hong Kong laws that they never bothered to fix. The British thought that China would ruin Hong Kong anyways and change everything, and then the blame would go on to China or Beijing. So 17 years down the line, here we are, because Beijing really didn't change anything, and Hong Kong is pretty much the same laws and the same institutions as it did back pre-1997. And that's what has to be noted. 1997 was the handover from the UK to China. See, for 155 years, until this handover, Hong Kong was a British colony, okay? They were they took it from China at the end of the First Opium War. Hong Kong is a gateway to China and has been for probably centuries because it's a major port there. And at the time, it was actually, James Clavell wrote a book called Noble House, and it dealt with Jardines and the East Asia Company and the opium running. And that's actually why Hong Kong was so important to the British, because they were delivering opium at a high cost into China. Now, of course, you can only guess that the Chinese government put an end to that. But China has still been the gateway Hong Kong has still been the gateway to China. I did live in Hong Kong for about 7 months in early 2000, or late 2000, 2001, and I still think of it as part of China. And in fact, that's the way Beijing views Hong Kong, as just another city in China. But they are known as the SAR, or the Special Administrative Region, whereby they're one country with two systems. They have allowed the system, the British system and the British laws that were implemented in pre-1997 to continue. But they do want to vet the leaders. Now, there's dissatisfaction with the current leader, Luong. There are a lot of groups of people out there that were protesting. It's pretty much over right now. Everybody's gone home, or most people have gone home. But the real issue, and this is what I think the American people have to understand, the real issue is economic. The majority of the protesters, okay, the young people that were out there, whether they're high school students or university students, they're out there because they can barely survive on the low wages that they're making. And at one time, when I was there in the early 2000s, people in Hong Kong were making good money. They were making a high salary. In fact, that's why so many of the international companies were moving to China. They moved over, manufacturing moved over the border into the Shenzhen area of China because wages were low. And many companies were setting up in Shanghai area because wages were very low. Now, the only thing that has stayed in Hong Kong, and I believe will likely stay there, is banking and finance, because China regulates banking and finance very strictly. And one of the things we also have to recognize is one of the things that Hong Kong is noted for is derivatives. They were one of the first, let me see here, I've got information on derivatives. Speculation and bad loans were being pushed out. Oh, here it is, yeah. Hong Kong was one of the first markets to go into derivative trading with repackaged bad loans. They are now the 7th largest derivative trading market in the world. And China China, because they still heavily regulate that market, knows the risks with such instruments. So Hong Kong, the tycoons, the elites do not want to lose banking and finance there. But they're angry because they are competing with the tycoons of Beijing. One of the things we have to recognize is that there are more billionaires in Hong Kong than probably anywhere else in the world. There's something like 39 billionaires in Hong Kong out of a number of something like 7 million people. And when it comes to the lower level workers, their salaries have been so low of late, they can't survive. Also, real estate is very, very expensive. That has been one of the speculative markets. With very open and barely regulated systems, Hong Kong tends to speculate in various markets. But there is even here's an example, an iPhone market where Hong Kong resells to the mainland. Recently, that market nearly collapsed due to the slowdown in mainland tourism to Hong Kong. So Hong Kong's dependent upon banking and finance, and they're dependent upon tourism. The low salaries, so much of manufacturing has left, but the low salaries tend to be in the service industry, which is very tourist-oriented. And that's what's making it very difficult. You also have huge numbers of mainlanders from the south of China who moved into Hong Kong and are doing a lot of the, what we call the lower jobs, okay, cleaning jobs. And I know when I lived there, they were looked down upon considerably by the Hong Kong elite. So they're making very, very low salaries. In fact, they refer to some of the apartments that people are living there, slums. They have a lot of slums there. They refer to them as cages. I mean, it's that bad. So here you have a lot of students and a lot of college students graduating, and there are no jobs for them. And the jobs that are there for them have such low wages that they can barely feed themselves, let alone, live. So it is a real problem, and it is a major problem. But we also have to look at the fact that a lot of the protests that are out there in an attempt to talk about democracy or to make the Beijing government look really bad, I think the U.S. was hoping for some kind of a Tiananmen massacre again, and I don't think China, that's not going to happen. And even making it about Premier Xi Jinping is a mistake because he's working currently on trying to alleviate some of the inequality gap within China. The other thing is voting. We think that, they don't have democracy in China, so they never vote. Well, that's not true either. They do vote. They vote on almost all local positions, okay? They have to vote for their local officials. So voting and democracy is actually very, very much a part of the average Chinese person's daily life, except when it comes to the Communist Party that rules, or what would be comparable to our federal government. No, they do not have a chance of ever voting for that. So what I'm trying to explain is that Hong Kong is just another city in China. That's the way China and Beijing views it. And so, and if anybody knows anything about the Chinese culture, going out and shaming them by demonstrating and protesting in the way that the protesters in Hong Kong have done, that is not the way you actually accomplish anything. When you want to accomplish something in China, you're going to negotiate, you're going to arbitrate, but you're going to sit down and you're going to talk about it. You're not going to demand. That does not work. I can guarantee it didn't work in the old days, and it doesn't work today. Now, something else, the reason I want to counteract a lot of the information that's been out there is that we have seen I have seen things posted on Facebook that, the U.S. is behind this, okay? That we're fomenting all the trouble. It's NED or NDI or NRI. Now, I'm not saying that they aren't possibly involved. NED is the National Endowment for Democracy. NRI is the National Republican Institute. NDI is the National Democratic Institute. I know personally for a fact that they do support dissident groups throughout the world, or depending on the nation. So while they may support them in Thailand or Burma, and I know they do that, I can't say that they support them in other nations or even Hong Kong. But it wouldn't surprise me if they weren't funding groups. But I want to make it very clear, they don't care about democracy. They support dissident groups based upon whether or not they support capitalism. That is their first goal. Do you support capitalism? They don't care whether you support democracy or not. But it's important to recognize that this is a Hong Kong thing. This is a China thing. They do have issues. They do have economic issues. And when we take information, we have to be very, very cautious of where we take it in from. I have articles here I've got several articles coming from the World Socialist website, and I have read from them several times over the past couple months, actually. They're highly critical of U.S. foreign policy and intervention around the world. But on this particular issue, the only thing that they would say is that while there's no doubt that both U.S. and Britain are calculating how to exploit the situation as part of its pivot to Asia, the Obama administration is actively engaged in diplomatic intrigues and machinations, as well as a military buildup against China throughout the region. But by using proxies, by supporting and sending weapons now to Vietnam, Japan is being remilitarized, South Korea, the Philippines, we're putting more bases all around, but not necessarily putting our boots on the ground, okay? And at the same time, while we know this is happening, and while some of these organizations may be giving money and support, many of the pan-Democrats and the Occupy Central leaders, who also, these are the people behind the protest, are pro-Western, have a pro-Western orientation, as well as links to the U.S. and Britain. Nonetheless, it's very important to recognize that this does not in any way have anything to do or anything like the revolutions, what they refer to as the color revolutions in the various former Soviet republics, okay, which were backed, financed, and in some cases engineered by way of many U.S. front organizations. And that we have some proof of. So that's what I'm trying to say. So while these protests have erupted over the past week, and they may have foreign support in some respects, there has been no engineering or intervention. So when I see this coming from Asia watchers that actually lack credibility, I have to point it out that we have to proceed cautiously when we make accusations that we don't have documented proof of.
Yeah. Well, I think the important point here is that the mass protests by young people in Hong Kong are being presented in the American media as the uprising of idealistic young people who are demanding democracy. They're constantly being called pro-democracy,
right,
and that is opposed to the hardliners who want to maintain the present system, the one that's being imposed from Peking. And that is, there's an element of truth in that, I suppose. Well, but the larger truth is that there's a lot of unrest in Hong Kong for other reasons.
Right. And it's economic, but it's also not, it's not about Beijing. That's the interesting thing. Right. They're focusing and blaming Beijing for everything, but the fact of the matter is, it's what's happened. The business is taking place in China now, and a lot of the business and manufacturing that used to be done in Hong Kong just isn't being done in Hong Kong anymore. It's moved to China, the international companies, etc. So and as far as the law and as far as the lack of democracy, again, the laws were written up pre-1997 between China and the UK, and Martin Lee, who's one of the leaders of this democratic movement, when he went to the UK, I think it was about 2 months ago, trying to get their support, they pretty much didn't care. And here it's been documented, his conversation with them, that the British were kind of like, when one of the Chinese premiers visited, the British never even mentioned it. They just went about signing contracts worth billions of dollars. So, going to their, Hong Kong people looking to their former colonialist as being somehow their saviors. No. It's all about the money. It's all about the business. It's all about what's taking place.
Was Hong Kong one of the treaty ports that were forced upon China in the 19th century when they were repeatedly humiliated during the Opium Wars and so on? I mean, there's a whole string of them there along the eastern coast of China, Macau, which has become international gambling center, actually.
Well, now it's part of China. Now it's a Chinese gambling center. Yes. It was Portuguese. Yeah. Well, it was the Portuguese took Macau. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the principal, apparently, global competitor to Las Vegas. And it's an enormous gambling industry there, apparently.
Yes,
And,
it is.
Is there any pressure from Peking to shut it down or anything of the kind?
Nope.
No,
Not to my knowledge. They thought there would be.
Yeah.
I was in Macau before. Actually, no, I was in Macau after, I think, the takeover. I know that they had a lot of crime. I'm not sure when Macau went back to China, so I'm not even sure. I thought I was there before China took over Macau. That I don't remember, but to my knowledge, it's still a gambling den. Yeah.
Then there's Shanghai, which is even lent a word to the language, being Shanghaied, being
Well,
taken away forcibly. And
Shanghai is one of the coolest cities in the world. Okay, I lived
What do
there
you
for
mean by
almost
that?
2 years. I lived there almost 2 years. Not only is it beautiful, huge, wide avenues. You had, at one time, okay, this was shameful. This was shameful to people back to the Chinese before the communist takeover, was the fact that you had these embassies. You had the British, you had the French, you had the Dutch, you had the Japanese, you had all these different nationalities setting up their embassies and setting up what they called their own territory. And they did not come under, or concession. Concession was the word that they used. They did not come under Chinese law at all. Now, and it wasn't like we have diplomatic immunity. Chinese had absolutely no control whatsoever. They were an entity in and of themselves. Now, this is the kind of shame that China had to endure. But it also makes it, I have to say, it makes it a lovely city to live in, because the French concession was completely renovated by China. I've forgotten where they got their architects, but when you go into and everybody would go to the French concession on Friday and Saturdays. I would go there for breakfast Sunday morning, but that's where you headed on Friday nights and Saturday nights. It's full of restaurants, it's full of like nightclubs, shopping, boutiques, cafes. I mean, you feel like, I felt more like I was in Paris sometimes, where I've been twice, when I was in the French concession of Shanghai, than I felt when I was back in Paris again. It's also, now as it's been pointed out to me, of course, Shanghai is their, what do you call it? It's their stage almost. I mean, it's their, where all the Westerners flock to see China, okay? Mm-hmm. So Shanghai is not really China, but yet it is China. Yeah. And it's very beautiful, it's very modern, and it's expensive, very expensive. But it's a place that when I lived in Hong Kong, and the company I worked for at the time was actually, like other companies that I was working on behalf of, were looking to move to Shanghai. I didn't want to go. I just felt like, oh God, I've lived in Southeast Asia, which is very colorful, very exciting, very dynamic, full of energy. I just somehow, like most Americans, had this image of China as being very gray, very dull, very controlled. And so I didn't want to go, so I ended up taking another job in the Philippines. Then a few years later, I went with an American company. They sent me to Shanghai. I felt it was my duty, since I knew I had the expertise that they wanted, to go and work there. But I went reluctantly. And of course, I loved it. I was amazed. Shanghai and other parts, Beijing also, they're as colorful, as dynamic, and for sightseeing, for tourism, as any place on the world. Any major city you go to in the world. Yeah. Now, what I'm saying, though, is that the problems of Hong Kong are the problems of Hong Kong. They're related to their, again, we're talking about the 1%. They have so many billionaires, and you have a lot of rivalry between the wealthy tycoons in Hong Kong and the wealthy tycoons of China or Beijing. So, and they're able to sort of foment a lot of the protest in order, because they're afraid of losing. Yeah. Hong Kong millionaires are afraid they're going to lose out to China.
Let me underline some of what you've said by referring to this article by Craig Stevens in the Wall Street Journal online, published October 5th. He writes that Hong Kong has its own brand of economic failure that does not show up in fiscal balances or unemployment rates. Instead, it is evident in jobs that pay wages too low to make a living. The minimum wage is just 30 Hong Kong dollars, or $3.87 an hour, and property prices that are too high to find somewhere big enough to live.
Yeah.
These issues are not new, but they have now reached a breaking point. The reason China's Hong Kong Special Administrative Region is on the brink of revolt, well, that's questionable, is that successive governments have failed to address such basic social demands. This turns them into political demands. Authorities can hardly claim that they were not warned. Back in 2009, then Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao raised the issue of deep-rooted contradictions in Hong Kong when he admonished Donald Tsang, the territory's chief executive at the time, to do better in maintaining Hong Kong's harmony and stability. The contradiction is demonstrated in Hong Kong's off-the-chart income inequality, with almost 20% of the population living below the poverty line, according to a government report issued last year. And since those comments by Wen, the forces beyond this polarization in wealth and income has gone into overdrive. At its root is Hong Kong's persistence in keeping its 30-year-old peg to the U.S. dollar. Isn't that an oddity? I mean, it's a peculiarity of the system, is that the Hong Kong currency is pegged to the U.S. dollar.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But let's see what happens.
Yeah.
You know, now with the BRICS having their own international bank, with China doing business with Russia, Pepe Escobar has been talking about this. Let's see how long the peg to the U.S. dollar lasts.
Yeah.
And what is that going to do to U.S. currency when it's eventually no longer the currency, the international?
Yeah. Well, there are many complications there.
Yeah.
And especially concerning these global currency exchanges. And they may eventually decide in Hong Kong, or at least a majority, or the young people anyway, that this attachment to the U.S. dollar has become so dysfunctional that they will demand that it be ended. And but no one really trusts the Chinese currency all that much, apparently. And what do you think about that?
I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on the currency, but to say that no one trusts the Chinese currency, I'm not sure about that. Let's wait and see what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
I
well, that's
don't have a background in
yeah, that's what we're constantly being
yeah.
told anyway.
Right.
And
right.
that sounds like another one of those exaggerations. But
when I left Shanghai in 2009, our accountant, an American, he said, well, don't change your RMB, or yuan is how we refer to it. Don't change it. Keep it. Take it back with you. Save it, because it's going to be worth so much more in the future. And so I took his word for it and brought it back. But then I thought, what am I doing with all this Chinese currency sitting around in my... So I did go and exchange it somewhere. I forget where, one of the airports probably, when I was traveling. And of course I didn't get very much for it. But I think he was probably looking at the, not the foreseeable future, but long-term future.
Yeah.
So it's going up. I don't think there's any doubt that Chinese currency is going up. I know other people that are holding on to their Chinese yuan because they know it'll go up. The U.S. dollar is more than likely going to go down.
Another straw in the wind, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City has been sold to a Chinese company. And it's supposedly the most luxurious, prestigious hotel property in the world, according to some. And it's an indication of the extent to which American real estate, especially luxury real estate, is being bought up by, well, Chinese in particular, but other foreign interests as well. So what is the larger significance of that? Well, I'll leave that to you to speculate about, but it's fascinating, the extent to which U.S. and China have become so interdependent, intertwined fiscally, that it raises a question about how hostile we can ultimately become. And is this a good thing or a bad thing for us to be that interdependent economically? China holds enormous amounts of American debt, and as I indicated, is buying up more and more American property. Think that's a good thing or a bad thing for longer-term relations?
Well, Obama's going to be visiting China next month. I think that our provocations, and our military presence in China's backyard, so to speak, are selling weapons or distributing weapons to all of the Southeast nations there, including assisting Abe in the remilitarization of Japan. This is very much provocation on our part. I don't think it serves us well. Yeah. And you just look at the coalition now between China and Russia as a result of the U.S. Insisting on having NATO troops on Russia's borders and on the sanctions that we've been pushing onto Russia, and insisting that the EU follow along. So to me, it's very dangerous. Yeah. Very dangerous.
What about that whole southern arc around the south end of the South China Sea, stretching from Singapore to Malaysia, Indonesia? Do you have any thoughts about those?
Well, I've talked endlessly and nonstop about the railroads, what we call the Silk Railroad, that China is building all through Asia and Europe and Eurasia, in order to deliver their goods as well as to receive goods from primarily North Africa. And which is why, actually, when you look at the wars, that we're committing, we go into Africa and we go into the Maghreb with weapons. China goes in with a pen and a checkbook, and they buy what they want. And I'm not saying that that's always such a good thing, buying up all this land, having all this money, but at the same time, it certainly is preferable to going in with guns. And that's what we've been doing. So that's why I find myself continually defending China. Because I would rather deal with somebody carrying a pen than somebody carrying a rifle. Yeah. And as I said, it's just a matter of time. China's just building. They're just ignoring us most of the time when we provoke them, and they just go about building more and more railroads. I think I mentioned they're going to be doing one now with the Maldives. They're talking to Indonesia, India. So and here's something I want to point out. We better start watching Pakistan. Now, we know that there's been a lot of turmoil in Pakistan. We know that the U.S. has been dropping drones on Pakistan. We have very good relations with the military of Pakistan. And I guess we're not terribly happy with Imran Khan, who has tried to, I don't know if he's still in power now, but he has tried to implement some reforms related to the inequality that exists there. But Pakistan and China are becoming closer. So is this something I am concerned about or worry about? No, on the contrary, I see it as positive, because I think the worst thing is for Pakistan's government to be further militarized.
Yeah, because of what was happening in Afghanistan and to some extent in western Pakistan, attacks by American drones and so on. Pakistan has been more and more driven into the arms of China. And they couldn't very well turn toward India, who is their long-term enemy, unfortunately. And there's this whole building coalition, apparently, of non-American or in some cases anti-American sentiment in Asia. And American attempts to pivot toward Asia make it look as if we're going to become antagonistic to this group of nations. And again, the longer term consequences of this are
really
I think
frightening.
a little, a little
really,
scary to me.
Really frightening, actually.
But, okay. One of the things in the news has been the ISIS people, the Islamic State people, beheading American and British citizens. A lot of indignation about that. This horrible, terrible, barbaric practice of cutting people's heads off. Here's an article from 2 or 3 weeks ago concerning U.S. rights experts looking at Saudi Arabia and urging it to halt the stream of executions and beheadings. 2 United Nations independent human rights experts today renewed their call on Saudi Arabia to implement an immediate moratorium on the use of the death penalty amid a reported increase in executions, many of them by beheading. Curiously, nothing is being said about this in the American media,
right.
but beheadings are a routine, everyday occurrence in Saudi Arabia. I guess we're not hearing about it because there are no Americans or British involved. According to the experts, so far in 2014, at least 45 people have been executed in Saudi Arabia. Between 4th and 22nd of August, 22 people were executed, which represents an average of 1 execution a day. These included at least 8 people beheaded for nonviolent crimes, including drug smuggling and sorcery. Other offenses resulting in beheading have reportedly including adultery and apostasy. So when's the last time you heard of anyone being executed by beheading for sorcery or apostasy?
When's the last time we've heard of anybody being executed, period, for adultery or sorcery or apostasy?
Yeah, right. So things can be pretty rough in Saudi Arabia, but it's our ally, and so we don't hear anything about it. We're instead encouraged to be indignant about beheadings by ISIS. So it depends on who the current ally is and the current enemy in the American propaganda system.
Well, Ron, does anyone think that when we drone a people, when we drop drones or bombs, or what are they called, DIMEs that were used by Israel on Gaza, when they cut the body in half, literally, blow off their arms, that they're not also beheading people? When we blow people up, that we're not beheading them?
Yeah.
So, to me, the way the news media keeps focusing, even just using the word beheading, beheading, beheading all the time, it's I find it really offensive, and it's such an obvious, because it's such obvious manipulation of the American public to conjure up this image, this horrible image in our minds.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the secrets of propaganda, of course, is that you try to connect with all of these images which rarely emerge into the full light of day, but they're flitting around in the unconscious of a lot of people. And it's a horror show down there in the id, apparently, but we like to keep that hidden. And when someone does mention what's actually going on, it creates something of a scandal and a call for repressing such horrible, scary, depressing talk. That's about all we have for this week, I think. Do you have any parting thoughts, Karen?
No.
No.
Do we have any announcements? No, I think I've related my parting thoughts.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any announcements of anything coming up? Oh, we're doing the market this Saturday morning.
Yes.
We will be at the market.
It's the second Saturday in the month, so that means we will be at the farmers market, as it's called, the outdoor market in downtown Urbana. And I would encourage everyone to look for us there and come and talk with us, debate, argue, whatever you feel like doing. And we'd be glad to see you there and talk about any of these issues that we've been raising today. Okay, well, there are still many things to be talked about. The hotspots in Ukraine and other places that we've had nothing to say about today. There are just too many issues and too many places that we can't get to and say very much about. But we hope you'll look in on us again next week when we'll be back with Aware on the Air, brought to you by the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana. My guest tonight has been Karen Aram, and I'm Ron Zook, signing off for another week. Good night.